Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be speaking on the very controversial topic if African Americans should get reparations for slavery. So, a little background information. Slavery is a topic that we hear about in history class, we read about in our history textbooks, we see it on TV shows like The Roots. And it's essential because we even learn about it in history class, and it just always had a presence. And not only has it always has a presence, it's have left a mark on African Americans, bringing up the question if they should get reparations for slavery. And there's a lot of people that's for it, and there's a lot of people that's against it for many reasons. Some say African Americans should get reparations for slavery because of the lingering effects, it serves justice, and it will be a payment for things that African Americans, not just African American slaves have helped with. While others say slavery happened a long time ago, slaves are dead, or black people already got reparations for slavery through things like welfare and food stamps. Well, the truth is, African Americans should get reparations for many things, like its lingering effects. For one, a public research poll by CNN reported 83% of African Americans said slavery still deeply affects them today. Not just affects them, deeply affects them, indicating the harm it has caused. If African Americans didn't feel like it caused harm, they wouldn't have said it. They would just say, no, it hasn't deeply affected me. On top of that, a lot of African Americans live in poverty and have less educational opportunities, which ruled back to slavery because during slavery times, African American slaves wasn't allowed to have education. A very limited few did. And if African American slaves were caught trying to educate themselves through various things like reading and writing, they would face various consequences like getting beat by their master. And there was even laws and acts like the anti-literacy law that limited African Americans from having an education altogether. Not to mention, there's an uneven number of black men in the prison system, which bringing up the question, why is there an uneven number of black men in the prison system? Is it because of the color of their skin or the crimes they committed? On top of that, African Americans and whites face a huge wealth gap that roots back to slavery. In fact, the median wealth of a white household is 41 times greater than the one of a black family. 41 times greater. A white family's median wealth of a household is $147,000, while a black one is only $3,000. $3,000 is essentially nothing. It's chump change. Also, reparations could have benefits and conserve justice. For example, reparations have been talked about being used for museums dedicated to the legacy and history of slavery, which is useful because but people wouldn't have to read about slavery in a textbook or hear about it. They could see it in the living flesh with various artifacts, statues, like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass. And it would just be a good thing because it shows that its name is still alive. It's like slavery didn't go down in vain. There's museums for it. Reparations also have grounding in the roots and legacy of slavery through segregation and other policies that promoted disparities of wealth between whites and blacks. And reparations also have been talked about to have the potential to build solidarity with working class agency, and it also has the potential to have better efforts towards a healthcare system for African Americans and living wages, which is crucial and beneficial because a lot of times in the healthcare system, African Americans face disparities and discrimination. For example, for African American women, they're more likely to die in pregnancy rather than a white woman because essentially their concerns and issues are brushed off by the healthcare system. Reparations will also be a payment for slave labor and things they have helped with. For one, the United States benefited greatly from slavery. It is estimated that They benefited from $97 trillion worth of forced labor. $97 trillion. That let alone could be one reason for African Americans to get reparations for slavery. How would you feel if a country benefited that much money from the forced labor of your ancestors? It's just immorally wrong. To top that, some of the wealthiest families in the South can trace their riches from the free labor of African Americans. And when I say free labor of African Americans, I mean slaves. So some of the richest people that live in the southern areas, they don't work hard for their money. They got it from the free labor of slaves. Slavery has also paved the way and molded intuitions like capitalism, healthcare, and culture and politics. While this may sound all fine and dandy, some people have a lot of things to say about it. Some say slavery happened so long ago, or my family didn't own slaves. While that could be true, some don't understand that it's about the unpaid labor of millions and the legacy of slavery and the legacy that brought about things like Jim Crow laws and a race-based system of incarceration. While slavery was over in 1865 with the Emancipation Proclamation, its effects still lingered and still linger today, like with things like the Jim Crow laws, where African Americans faced segregation and was essentially driven out of society. Some people also say reparations have been paid to African Americans with many things like welfare and EBT, which is food stamps, which is very ignorant. Is a major stereotype that many people associate with African Americans is not true at all. In reality, welfare was never meant for African Americans in the first place. It was in place to help alleviate the Great Depression and the people that was greatly affected by the Great Depression. In fact, it was said that whites got paid more welfare checks than blacks during the Great Depression. Or a lot of people say a lot of Americans today don't have no connection to slavery, and it's hard to trace their ancestry. Historian John Brown stated, a lot of Americans do have a connection with slavery, advantage if they're white and disadvantage if they're black. And on top of that, since slavery, there has been an idea and belief that African Americans have physical powers with little intellectual ability, which is true. And you see with the NBA and great basketball players like Michael Jordan, we see his physical abilities. We praise African Americans for things like that, but we don't look towards their